Weapons of the Spirit by Father John J. Hugo. 2. We do not war according to the flesh. The New Testament reaffirms the teaching concerning war that we cited in the last chapter from the Old Testament. St. James asks the identical question that we have asked. From whence are wars and contentions among you? And he answers at once. Are they not hence from your concupiscence which war in your members? Obviously, the word concupiscence is the key word of this text, whose meaning we must know if we are to understand the apostles' teaching. There is no difficulty about the meaning, however. Concupiscence is simply the Latin for desire. Our concupiscences are our desires. Only, since our nature has been touched by the poison of original sin, these desires have been turned awry, so that now, instead of seeking satisfaction in their true good, which is God, they pursue, restlessly, the fleeting and failing things of earth. Therefore, the concupiscence that causes war is simply the inordinate desire for earthly goods, and desire becomes inordinate the moment that men seek their joy in these goods apart from God. Pope Pius XI, who, in his encyclical Ubi Arcano Dei, supplies the text of St. James to conditions in our own day, enumerates and describes in some detail, following St. John the Evangelist, the concupiscences that bring about war. There is the lust of the flesh, which the Holy Father explains is the desire for pleasure, the lust of the eyes, which is the desire for gain, and the pride of life, which is the desire of dominating others, and of obtaining worldly honors. It is from this intemperance of desire, concludes the Pope, sheltering itself under an appearance of public good or love of country, that come the rivalries and enmities that we see between nations. This doctrine, despite a change in terminology, is in agreement with the doctrine already explained. The Old Testament says that idolatry is the cause of war. St. James, that the cause is concupiscence. The difference is only apparent. The explanation and connecting link between the two teachings is supplied by St. Paul when he calls covetousness a form of idolatry, a form not unfamiliar to the modern world. For this covetousness is, at the same time, a variety of the concupiscence of which St. James speaks, just as love or hatred, to take a similar case, are special kinds of the generic thing called emotion. Concupiscence is the general, inordinate desire for all earthly goods and pleasures, while covetousness, as St. Thomas says, implies a certain inordinate attachment to riches, and, according to a secondary extension of the term, to all other sensible goods. Concupiscence, covetousness, idolatry, describe it as you will. Here, at any rate, is the true and the deepest cause of war. Let us observe here, also, that the disordered desire for creatures is not necessarily a sinful desire. Any desire or love of creatures for their own sake, apart from God, is an imperfection, and a disorder even when it is not a sin. A Christian's duty, and much more the duty of a soul that aspires to perfection, writes Father Augustine Baker, is to love God alone, and other things only in relation to him as instruments for increasing his love in our souls. All affection for creatures, as such, is more or less imperfect, not merely when the affection is excessive, but because its object is something apart from God. If a man loves his work because it enables him to provide a good home, etc., for his wife this will be most pleasing to her. But if he becomes attached to his work to the point that it causes him to neglect her, then his conduct will be far from pleasing, and she will get scant satisfaction from the fact that her husband, at least, does not go off with some other woman, since she scarcely ever sees him anyway. In like manner, the Christian is to use creatures only for the glory of God. He therefore, who lives a careless, worldly life, and is attached to creatures because of their own attractiveness, is guilty of inordinate affection, even when this affection does not lead him into sin. Root and substance of concupiscence. It is true, certainly, that covetousness and concupiscence, the cause of war, are not exactly, or formally, as the philosophers say, the same as attachment to created goods, which we have also asserted to be cause of war. Their difference, however, does not affect the substantial truth of our doctrine. Covetousness and concupiscence differs from attachment as desire differs from love, as the tiny sprout that appears on a tree differs from the mature fruit. Inordinate desire for earthly goods and the selfish love for them are but different stages of the same activity. Covetousness and concupiscences are the appetite for these goods. Selfish love and affection for them is the satisfaction of that appetite. Moreover, although desire normally precedes the possession and love of a thing, there is a sense in which the covetousness may be said to come from love and to presuppose it. For we would not desire material goods in the first place. At least we would not allow ourselves to be influenced by that desire, if, had we not already, being drawn away and allured, indulged our appetite and formed a taste for them. In brief, he whose heart is conformed to this world covets the goods of this world, as the ones who desire sweets are those who have already experienced their tastiness. Let us summarize all the doctrine considered thus far by the statement that the root and substance of concupiscence and covetousness is the affection and love for earthly goods, and this love is the idolatry that brings on war. It may be well to explain here, in passing, how we are to understand the phrase, love for creatures. There are some who consider it unobjectionable, even a duty, to love the creatures of the world, as some of the saints surely did. Now, there is certainly a sense in which it is right to love creatures, the sense, namely, in which the saints are said to love them, in relation to God, and as mirroring the divine perfections. Alas, however, there are too few saints, and the way in which most men, including a disturbing number of Catholics, love creatures has little in common with the conduct of the saints. St. Francis of Assisi, for example, was one who loved creatures, but he was also, in the words of Pius XI, one of the greatest penitents, the poor man of Assisi, who possessed absolutely nothing on earth and bore in his emaciated body the painful stigmata of his crucified Lord. It is necessary to abandon all imperfect love of creatures in order to love God with one's whole heart. It is equally necessary to abandon it if we are to love even creatures themselves supernaturally. We must first renounce creatures, at least in our hearts. Then we will rediscover them. We must first leave the earth behind, in order to travel to God. Then may we, returning thence, see it and love it as children of God. Until then, our love for creatures will be selfish and therefore harmful. This is why we speak of hating creatures. Hence also the Scriptures say, "Love not the world, nor the things which are in the world." Saint Teresa will serve as an example of how the saints speak. To her daughters, she says, "Despise all earthly things." Finally, morning after morning, the Church herself, as a mother who patiently repeats lessons to her children, puts in our mouths, at the collect of the Mass, the petition that God will teach us to despise earthly things and love those that are heavenly. because the merely natural, imperfect love for creatures is the kind that is ordinarily known. We are justified, in ordinary speech, as these examples show, to talk of renouncing this love and of hating creatures. To resume our discussion of war, St. Augustine takes the scriptural teaching we have studied and applies it to the problems of the world in his day. He is responsible for the principle, later adopted by St. Thomas, that material goods, unlike those of the spirit, cannot belong wholly and simultaneously to one person. And herein, adds Father Garrigou-Lagrange, from whom the words of St. Augustine are quoted, lies the reason of that unhappy conflict of interests which arises from the feverish quest of these earthly possessions. Material goods, the more they are sought for their own sake, tend to cause disunion among men, for they sow discord among those that seek them, and a greater discord as they are sought with greater avidity. God is now showing men what a great mistake they make when they try to do without him, when they regard earthly enjoyment as their highest good. Forgetfulness of God brings distress. Modern popes, in their great peace encyclicals, carry the same teaching forward to explain the dissension and misery in our contemporary world. Benedict XV enumerates 4 causes of war, and deeper than any of the others, he says, is the feverish striving after the empty goods of the world. We have already quoted from Pius XI the words which attribute war in our day to the fact that all strive insatiably to attain the fleeting and failing things of the earth. He adds that it is of the very nature of material things that when sought unrestrainedly, they bring with them every sort of evil. Finally, the whole doctrine is summed up with unsurpassed brevity and simplicity in these words of the present pontiff. Forgetfulness of God is the fundamental cause for the ills which are distressing humanity. Such is the teaching of the Scriptures and of Christian tradition concerning the causes of war. Let us at once draw from it some practical conclusions or corollaries. First, it is customary to speak of war as a necessary evil. But the most terrible thing about war, worse by far than any of the gruesome stories that come from the front, is that it is a wholly unnecessary evil. A Christian cannot subscribe to the stale and stupid fatalism that looks upon war as inevitable, nor may the words of Christ concerning wars and rumors of wars, which refer to conditions before the destruction of Jerusalem, be twisted, as is sometimes done, into meaning that it is impossible to destroy war and therefore useless to work for such an end. War comes from man's failure to love God with his whole heart. It comes from his freely turning away from God towards the creatures of the world. It is not the effect of huge, overpowering forces that carry men along with them willy-nilly. Such a view is directly contrary to Christian teaching concerning personal freedom. It results from ignorance or neglect of a truth that is found on almost every page of any Christian devotional book. The truth is this: he that desireth the perfect joy, that is everlasting, setteth little price by temporal joy. And he that seeketh any worldly joy, or doth not in his heart fully despise it, showeth himself to love but little the joy of heaven. Secondly, and if the cause of war is primarily moral and spiritual, then the cure for it must likewise be primarily moral and spiritual. The cure cannot be anything that is applied to the mere externals of human life or society, nor can it be any merely human means, however efficacious. Spiritual and supernatural means must be brought into play. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. The trouble is in the human heart, which is turned toward creatures, an opposite movement must be begun, and the heart redirected to its Creator. Therefore the prophets cry out in troubled times, "Turn to the Lord with all your heart." No doubt, in order to bring about peace, we must, as Pius XI says, make use of all lawful means at our disposal. Yet he adds at once that mere human means and expedients are not enough. Further, the popes never place war even among the natural means to be used for bringing about a new order of justice and charity and peace. After the outbreak of World War I, Pope Benedict XV protested, "Surely there are other ways and means whereby violated rights can be rectified. Let them be tried honestly and with good will, and let arms meanwhile be laid aside." Again, he said, still more insistently, "Nor let it be said that the immense conflict cannot be settled without the violence of war." Similarly, after the beginning of World War II, Pope Pius XII said of the problems that had brought it on that they were not unsolvable, but that a solution had been prevented by deep and apparently irremovable distrusts. That is what we have just said. The love of earthly things leads to distrust and division, and, finally, if it is not checked, to destruction. All share the guilt. Third, the leaders of the nations generally receive the blame for war, as though they alone are responsible for it and others are mere unfortunate victims. But God does not punish an entire nation or nations for the sins of a few leaders. Without doubt, the leaders are primarily responsible, simply because they are leaders. Nevertheless, they do but personify attitudes and tendencies, aspirations and ambitions that are diffused throughout a whole people. The worldliness that causes war is spread everywhere today and is found in the hearts of innumerable men, women, and children, as well as in those who control governments. The innocent victims of war, much as we may sympathize with them, are too often themselves guilty of that turning towards creatures, which has brought war upon us all. We read in the Old Testament that God punished the Jews by war, first because their king had sinned, but also because the people had sinned with him. "And the Lord shall give up Israel for the sins of Jeroboam, who hath sinned and made Israel to sin." Pope Pius XI advises us, if we wish to get to the roots of the modern trouble, to consider these words of our Lord. "All these evil things come from within." From within what? Obviously, from within the heart. Jesus had just said, "Understand, you not that everything from without, entering into a man, cannot defile him. Because it entereth not into his heart." The things which come out from a man, they defile a man. To eliminate war, not only must the conduct of leaders be reformed, but also the hearts of those whom they lead must be purified of the dross of earthly affections. "Prepare you hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only."